You can't be here," she screamed, her voice slicing through the peaceful silence like a siren. I looked up from the tent pole I was driving into the soft earth by the lake, thinking maybe I'd startled a hiker or something. But no, there she was, a woman in her late 50s, storming toward me like she was marching into battle. She had on bright pink yoga pants, oversized sunglasses, and a tight ponytail that bounced with every furious step. Her hands clutched a phone like it was a weapon, her knuckles white from gripping it so hard. "This is private property," she shrieked again, pointing at the ground like she was declaring war. I didn't say anything yet, just stared at her, confused but not surprised. I had been warned about people like her in certain neighborhoods, rule enforcers, the Karens of the world. But even then, I hadn't expected this level of aggression, especially considering I was camping on my own land. I calmly stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and asked, "Can I help you with something?" She looked at me like I'd asked if I could steal her car. "Help me, you're trespassing. You think you can just pitch a tent here by this lake? Like it's a public park," she barked. "Do you even live around here?" I took a deep breath, holding back the urge to laugh. "Yes, actually, I do, and more importantly, I own this land. Don't lie to me," she shouted immediately, cutting me off. "I know all the property owners here. I run the HOA. There it was, the three-letter curse word I hoped I'd never have to deal with. HOA Homeowners Association. The ultimate badge of petty power. Before I could even respond, she spun on her heel and yelled into her phone. 911. "Yes, there's a man setting up camp by the lake. I think he's dangerous. He's refusing to leave. Dangerous." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't playing loud music. I wasn't causing any trouble. I was literally putting up a tent, quietly, by a peaceful lake that I had purchased just 3 weeks ago. But none of that mattered to her. She saw someone she didn't recognize, doing something she didn't approve of, and decided that was enough reason to escalate. The 911 operator must have been used to this kind of thing, because she looked irritated that they weren't coming fast enough. "Yes, he's still here. He's being aggressive now," she lied. Aggressive. I was standing still. I hadn't moved a muscle. My arms were crossed, and I was quietly waiting for her tantrum to end. She finally hung up, glaring at me with narrowed eyes. "They're on their way. You better start packing before you get arrested." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I wanted the police to come. I wanted them to see the paperwork. I wanted them to deal with her. So I just turned back to my tent, secured the last stake, and zipped it up. I sat on my camping chair by the lake, sipped from a bottle of water, and let the breeze wash over me. Meanwhile, she stood about 20 feet away, watching me like a hawk, probably waiting for me to run or do something dramatic, but I didn't. I knew the law. I had done everything right. I bought the land through a legal process. I paid the taxes, the lake access, the road, the entire area was mine. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't some clueless camper. I was a successful contractor who had made a small fortune flipping homes. I'd been looking for a slice of peace for years. When this private lake lot came up at an auction, I grabbed it without hesitation. There was no HOA jurisdiction over my land, and no easement granting her or anyone else access through my property. But the beauty of it all was that the narrow road she and the neighborhood used to access the lake, the one that cut through my land, was legally mine too. So technically, she had no right to be here, and if anyone was trespassing, it was her. Still, I waited patiently, letting her stew in her own arrogance. Minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A sheriff's car pulled up slowly, lights off but clearly on alert. The officer stepped out, adjusted his belt, and walked toward us. She ran to him like she'd found her hero. "That's him," she yelled, pointing at me. "He's squatting by the lake. I want him removed immediately." The officer held up his hand, calming her down. "Ma'am, let me talk to him." He walked toward me, polite but serious. "Sir, may I ask what you're doing here today?" I stood up and handed him my ID. "I'm camping," I said calmly, "on land that I own." He raised an eyebrow. "You own this property?" "Yes, sir, and I have the documents to prove it." I walked over to my truck and pulled out a folder from the glove box. Inside were the DAD, the property map, and the purchase agreement. He looked through them carefully, then cross-referenced the coordinates on his device. After a few moments, he looked up at me, nodded, and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this man is not trespassing. He is the legal owner of this land, including the access road." Karen froze. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "That can't be right. That lake belongs to our community. We've been coming here for years. That doesn't change the fact that it's private land now," he replied. "You don't have permission to be here. In fact, you're the one currently trespassing." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked between me and the officer like reality had betrayed her, and that's when it clicked for her. She'd messed with the wrong person. Not only was I within my rights, but I had the power to make things even more uncomfortable for her. I didn't say anything more, just nodded at the officer, thanked him for coming, and sat back down in my chair. The lake was calm, the sun was setting, and the war had only just begun. 3 weeks before that chaotic afternoon, I had found the listing by accident. I wasn't even actively looking for property, just casually browsing rural land listings late at night with a cup of coffee in hand. That's when I saw it. Large, heavily wooded lot with a private lake, narrow road access, and absolutely zero HOA restrictions. The photos looked like something out of a dream. Tall pines surrounding a glassy, quiet lake. A single dirt road led to the water, completely isolated from any main streets or neighborhoods. The listing mentioned that the land had once been part of a larger estate, but had been divided and auctioned off quietly due to unpaid taxes. The previous owner hadn't maintained it, but the land itself was perfect, raw, untouched, peaceful. I called the agent the next morning, and within a week, I had bought it outright. Cash deal, no mortgage, no bank delays. I wanted full ownership, no strings attached. The seller didn't even blink. He was thrilled to offload it. When I got the keys and the documents, I sat in my truck at the edge of the property and just smiled. After years of city noise, cramped apartments, and dealing with nosy neighbors, this was finally mine. Peace, trees, and water. That first weekend, I brought a foldable chair, a cooler, and just sat by the lake watching ducks glide across the surface. No loud cars, no sirens, no barking dogs. Just silence. It felt like therapy. But then, I noticed something strange. Cars, SUVs, mostly would occasionally cut across the far side of the property, slowly driving down the private road near the lake. A few people would wave politely when they saw me. Others didn't acknowledge me at all. At first, I thought they were just lost hikers or people turning around. But it happened again, and again, until one afternoon, a man in a golf cart waved and shouted, "Thanks for letting us cut through, buddy." I blinked. "Cut through?" I asked. He laughed. "Yeah, we've been using this road for years. Shortest way to the neighborhood." That's when I realized what had been going on. The previous owner had probably turned a blind eye, or maybe he just didn't care. Over time, the residents in the nearby neighborhood had started using my private access road as their shortcut to the lake and back. They thought of it as their own. But there was no easement, no legal right to access. I checked the deed and property map again when I got home, just to be sure. Everything past a certain point, the trees, the lake, the road, even a stretch of shoreline behind the houses, it was all mine. I wasn't angry, not at first. I figured people had grown used to something that technically wasn't theirs, and I'm not the kind of guy to cause a scene over a little road sharing. If they were polite and respectful, I didn't mind the occasional neighbor walking their dog near the trees or fishing by the water. But then I met Karen. She changed everything. Even before the 911 call, I'd heard whispers. The old man who sold me the land mentioned her when we signed the papers. "Watch out for the lady in the pink house on the hill. She thinks she runs everything around here," he had said, chuckling. "Calls herself the HOA queen. Tries to scare everyone into doing what she wants." I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. A few days after I bought the property, I was walking the perimeter, marking trees I wanted cleared, when I saw her for the first time. She was standing at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, staring at me like I'd stepped onto her front porch uninvited. I gave her a friendly wave. She didn't wave back, just turned around and walked into her house. Cold, rude, but not unexpected. Some people aren't great with change. I brushed it off, but then she started showing up more often. Once, I was unloading some gear from my truck when she marched right up and said, "I don't know who sold you this land, but this road is for HOA members only." I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this road is part of my parcel. It's not under your HOA." She narrowed her eyes. "I've lived here 20 years. Don't lecture me about what's mine." I tried to keep the peace. "I'm not here to fight anyone. I just want to enjoy my property like anyone else." She scoffed and walked off, muttering something about new money buying up everything. Still, I let it slide. I figured if I didn't engage, she'd move on. She didn't. I started noticing tire marks closer and closer to my lake. Signs that people were driving in and out while I wasn't there. One time, I found trash near the water, beer cans, fast food wrappers. That's when I decided to camp out there one weekend, not just to enjoy the lake, but to watch to see who really thought they owned the place. That's what led to that fateful Saturday, me pitching my tent and Karen bursting onto the scene like I had trespassed into the Queen's castle. But even then, I hadn't expected it to escalate so quickly. Within 3 minutes of spotting me, she had pulled out her phone and called 911 like I was some criminal breaking into her backyard, and she didn't hesitate to lie either. She told them I was acting suspicious, said I refused to leave, claimed I was aggressive. It was surreal, watching someone spin a whole false story in front of me, hoping that fear and authority would make me back down. But I didn't. I knew my rights. And more importantly, I knew something she didn't. That her house, her driveway, and the very road she drove on were surrounded by land I owned. Her authority was imaginary. Her threats were empty. And the biggest mistake she made wasn't calling the cops on me. It was assuming I didn't have the power to fight back. 10 minutes after Karen's frantic 911 call, the peaceful sounds of nature were drowned out by the low hum of tires crunching over gravel. A black and white sheriff's cruiser slowly rolled onto the private road, its headlights off but its presence unmistakably serious. Karen straightened her back like she was preparing to win a courtroom trial. Her face lit up as if reinforcements had arrived to remove a dangerous criminal from her pristine view. I stayed seated in my camping chair, watching the drama unfold like it was a badly written soap opera. The deputy, a man in his 40s with a calm and weathered look, stepped out of the car and adjusted his sunglasses. He took one quick look at Karen, who was already rushing toward him with her finger pointed straight at me like I was some sort of wild animal. "There he is, officer. That man right there. He set up camp by our lake, and he's refusing to leave," she shouted, her voice trembling with fake panic. The officer raised his hand slightly, signaling her to take a breath. "All right, ma'am, let me speak with him first." She didn't look happy about it, but she backed off a few steps, huffing dramatically. The officer walked toward me with steady, cautious steps. "Afternoon, sir," he said politely. "Mind telling me what you're doing here today?" I stood up slowly, smiled, and offered a calm response. "Just enjoying the weekend, officer, doing a little camping by my lake." He tilted his head. "Your lake?" "That's right," I said, reaching into the pocket of my backpack. "I've got the paperwork right here." I handed him a folder containing copies of my deed, the survey map, and the property tax receipt. He took them without a word and began flipping through the documents with a trained eye. Karen watched from behind a tree, arms crossed, tapping her foot like she was waiting for a nail salon appointment. The deputy looked up from the papers. "So you're saying you own this entire parcel, including the road?" "Yes, sir. Bought it 3 weeks ago at auction. The entire area is private property. No HOA oversight, no easement access. Everything beyond the gate, including this road, belongs to me." He nodded, then stepped a few feet back and spoke into his radio, confirming some details with dispatch. Karen took this moment to butt back. "There must be a mistake," she snapped. "We've been using this land for years. The HOA manages lake access and ma'am," the officer interrupted, holding up the documents for her to see. "This deed shows clear private ownership. No mention of community rights or shared access. No recorded easement. This gentleman is within his legal rights to camp here." Her jaw practically hit the dirt. "That can't be right. I've lived here 20 years. That lake is part of our neighborhood." The deputy shook his head. "It may have felt like that, but legally, it's not. This land belongs to him. I suggest you and your neighbors stop entering it unless invited." Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, caught somewhere between fury and humiliation. "But he's camping like some squatter. It's a bad image for the neighborhood." I couldn't help but chuckle softly. "A bad image for the neighborhood. Lady, I own the road you drove on to get here. I let people come and go without a problem until..." Now the deputy looked at me. "Would you like to press trespassing charges, sir?" I considered it for a second. "Not today, but if it happens again, I won't be as understanding." Karen looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. She spun on her heel, storming back toward her pink house at the top of the hill, muttering insults under her breath. The deputy handed my papers back and gave me a respectful nod. "Looks like you're good to go. Sorry about the inconvenience." "No problem," I replied. "Thanks for coming out." He got back in his cruiser and drove away slowly, probably rolling his eyes the whole way. I sat back down in my chair and stared out at the lake, but the calm had been broken. I wasn't angry, I was focused. Karen had shown me exactly what she thought of me, not just as a landowner, but as a person. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't introduced herself. She'd seen someone she didn't recognize doing something she didn't approve of and immediately called the police. That wasn't just rude, it was dangerous. And it was the final push I needed. I had been toying with the idea of fencing the property ever since I noticed the traffic from the neighborhood. But now I was certain. It wasn't just about peace anymore. It was about boundaries, real, physical, legal ones. If they didn't respect my ownership voluntarily, I would make them respect it with steel and concrete. That night, back home, I pulled out the property map again. I marked off the entry points. The access road, the area near the cul-de-sac, where Karen and a few others had been entering through. Then I started making calls. A surveyor, a contractor, a welder. I had the resources, the money, and now the motivation. This wouldn't just be a no trespassing sign nailed to a tree. This would be a message. Private land is private for a reason. If Karen thought calling 911 was going to intimidate me, she couldn't have been more wrong. What she didn't realize was that her actions were about to cost her and her neighbors far more than they imagined. Because I wasn't going to retaliate with words, I was going to retaliate with ownership. I didn't just own the land she trespassed on. I owned the road that led to her home. And very soon, I would make sure everyone in that neighborhood remembered who controlled it. Not with shouting, not with drama, but with gates, locks, and legal documents that didn't care how long someone had felt entitled to something. The next chapter of this story wasn't going to be about camping. It was going to be about consequences. I didn't waste a single day. The morning after the police incident, I stood on my property line with a hot cup of coffee and watched Karen Street from a distance. Cars came and went, just like they always had, cruising down the private road I now owned, completely unaware that their shortcut days were numbered. I wasn't angry, I was motivated. This wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries and respect. And if they wouldn't respect the land by choice, I'd make sure they respected it by force of law. I called a land surveyor first. Within 2 days, he came out with his gear, walking every inch of the road, measuring, flagging, and mapping out where my property legally began and ended. The survey confirmed everything I already knew. The narrow road leading from the cul-de-sac into the lake area ran directly through my land, with no easement or legal right-of-way for the HOA or its members. Legally, I could block it off and deny access to anyone I didn't personally authorize. That same afternoon, I called a gate installation company. The guy on the phone was curious. "What are you planning, boss?" he asked. I told him simply, "Just teaching some people about property rights." We laughed. By the end of the week, 2 thick metal posts were drilled deep into the ground on either side of the road, just before the tree line that opened up toward the lake. Between them, they installed a 12-foot-wide custom steel gate with a heavy-duty lock system and motion sensors, the kind of thing that doesn't budge unless you have a code or the key. Right in front of it, a large reflective sign read in bold white letters, "Private property, no trespassing, no access without written permission. Violators will be prosecuted." I stood there for a moment, admiring it. Simple, clean, unmistakable. The days of casual strolls and shortcut drives across my land were over, and I didn't stop there. I had the contractor add 2 smaller fences running parallel on each side of the gate, ensuring that no one could simply walk around it through the woods. Then I installed trail cams, 3 of them hidden in trees and facing the entry points. I didn't want to just stop them. I wanted to catch anyone who dared to test the limits. The response was immediate. The very next morning, I sat in my folding chair by the lake, sipping on a bottle of water and waiting. Around 9 a.m., I heard it tires on gravel. Karen's white Lexus SUV rounded the corner like usual, heading straight for the lake road. Then it hit the brakes. I couldn't see her face through the tinted glass, but I could practically feel her confusion through the air. She stopped at the gate, engine running. Then the driver's side door swung open. Karen got out, marched up to the gate, and tried to yank it open. Nothing. She pushed, pulled, kicked it lightly. Nothing. She stepped back and stared at the sign like it was written in another language. Then she did exactly what I hoped she would. She pulled out her phone. I could guess who she was calling. 5 minutes later, I got a notification from one of my trail cams. Another SUV had arrived. This one belonged to the HOA president, a man named Chuck who lived 2 houses down from Karen. He got out in his golf shirt and khakis, clearly not dressed for a fight, but confused and annoyed. He joined Karen at the gate, and together they examined the lock, the signs, the new fence. I watched from a distance, not hiding but not approaching either. I wanted them to stew in their frustration before I officially introduced them to their new reality. Eventually, Chuck spotted me and waved. I waved back. They walked toward me, expressions shifting between frustration and forced politeness. "Hey there," Chuck said, trying to smile. "You put this up?" "Sure did," I said, standing. "It's private land." "Thought it was time to enforce that." Karen jumped in, voice already shaking. "You can't block the road. This is how the whole neighborhood gets to the lake." I stayed calm. "Karen, that road is on my property. There's no recorded easement. You've been crossing my land without permission for years. That ends now." Chuck rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I understand the technicalities, but can't we work something out? This is really going to upset a lot of people." I nodded. "I don't doubt that, but maybe if people like Karen hadn't called the police on me for camping on my own land, I'd still be letting folks walk through. Now, access is denied." Karen's mouth opened in shock. "You're punishing the whole neighborhood because of me." I shrugged. "You made it personal, not me. I tried to be neighborly. You chose conflict." Chuck tried to reason further, but I stood firm. If the HOA wants access, they can make me a written offer to purchase a shared easement. But until then, this land is private, and I intend to keep it that way. The next week was chaos in the neighborhood. People complained, posted angry messages in the HOA Facebook group, and even tried to rally a petition. But none of them could change the facts. I owned the land. I had done nothing illegal, and now their shortcut to the lake was gone. Children who used to ride their bikes along the path were redirected by their parents. Joggers stopped at the gate and turned around. For the first time in years, the lakefront was quiet again. Peaceful. Mine. One afternoon, I was loading up my truck when a young couple from the neighborhood approached me. They were polite, respectful, and genuinely apologetic. "We're sorry for how everything started," the man said. That wasn't right. We don't agree with how Karen handled it. His wife nodded. Would it be okay if we wrote you a formal request for occasional access? We'd love to walk our dog near the lake, but only if you're okay with it. I smiled. That was all I ever wanted: respect, communication, and decency. Tell you what, I said, send me a written request, and I'll consider it. But if I catch anyone jumping the gate or sneaking through, it's over for everyone. They agreed, walked away happy. Unlike Karen, because for her, the gate wasn't just a barrier, it was a reminder. A reminder that calling the cops on someone without reason, assuming power she didn't have, and trying to control what wasn't hers came at a price. And that price was paid in steel, cement, and silence. The gate had become more than just a physical blockade. It was a symbol, a steel boundary that reminded everyone in that pristine, rule-obsessed neighborhood that they were no longer entitled to something they'd never legally owned in the first place. And while most of the neighbors quietly accepted the change, Karen, she simply couldn't let it go. Every day for the next week, she made a scene. One day she stood at the gate, yelling into her phone, demanding a meeting with the city council. Another day, she brought a clipboard and attempted to collect signatures for a petition to have my gate removed by force. I watched from a distance, leaning against the hood of my truck with my arms crossed, barely suppressing a grin. She was spinning herself into madness, and every time she tried to involve someone new, HOA members, the county clerk, a local attorney, they all came back with the same answer. He owns the land. He has every right. At some point, she must have realized that legally, she was boxed in. So she changed tactics. She tried to shame me. Flyers began appearing taped to mailboxes. Selfish new owner destroys community access. And say no to gatekeepers. I even found one tucked under my windshield wiper. I took it down, crumpled it up, and tossed it into the trash, with a smirk. The funny part was, no one else seemed to care. In fact, some neighbors started stopping by my driveway to chat. Honestly, one man told me, she's been a thorn in everyone's side for years, always bossing people around like she's mayor. Another woman confided, we never had permission to use the lake anyway. She just convinced us we did. It didn't take long for the tide to turn. Karen had built her authority on nothing more than bluster, and now that it had been challenged, people were beginning to see just how flimsy her power really was. The turning point came 2 weeks later, during an HOA meeting held at the community clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but word traveled fast. Karen stood up and demanded the HOA take legal action against me to force me to open the gate. The HOA president Chuckrist taunted in front of everyone that the board had already reviewed the land deeds, consulted attorneys, and concluded that not only was I legally in the right, but there was no historical easement, no implied access, and no legal argument to challenge my gate. She lost it. She reportedly shouted, if he won't leave, then I will, and stormed out of the meeting. I heard all of this from 2 different neighbors who attended, and both of them were smiling. As they told me, it's over, one of them said, she's done. And they were right. A week later, I saw a large real estate sign go up in front of Karen's bright pink house. For sale. The same house she had bragged about owning for over 2 decades. The same house she had claimed made her the queen of the neighborhood. Now, she was walking away. I watched from the lake as a moving truck pulled up, and workers began loading her things. Furniture, boxes, rugs. She paced around the front yard, barking at the movers like she had done to everyone in her life, but this time with panic in her voice. The control she'd always enjoyed was slipping away, and she couldn't stop it. I never approached her, never said a word. I just watched, peaceful calm, holding a cold drink in one hand and the property deed in the other. And then came the most satisfying moment of all. Late that afternoon, as the movers finished and closed the truck, Karen stood alone at the edge of her driveway. She turned and looked one last time toward the lake, toward the locked gate that had changed everything. I stood up, walked out to my fence line, and met her eyes across the distance. No words, just a nod, a silent goodbye. She didn't return the nod. She turned away and climbed into her car. The engine started, the wheels turned, and just like that, she was gone. The next morning, the sun rose over the lake, lighting the surface like gold. Birds chirped, trees swayed gently in the wind. And for the first time since I bought the land, it was quiet in every direction. No interruptions, no arguments, no power-hungry woman screaming about rules. Just peace. In the weeks that followed, life got better. The neighborhood relaxed. People became friendlier. Some even asked me politely for limited access to fish or take photos near the water. I granted permission to a few respectful families who understood the rules. It became a place of balance, private but not hostile, controlled but welcoming to those who earned it. I even built a small dock and started inviting friends over for weekends. We fished, grilled, told stories by the campfire. My vision for the land finally took shape, not just a place to escape, but a place where peace had to be earned and protected. Looking back, Karen's mistake wasn't just calling the cops on me. It wasn't even the lies she told or the petitions. She tried to rally. Her biggest mistake was assuming I was just another pushover, that I would fold under pressure, that my ownership meant less than her influence. But she learned the hard way that influence isn't ownership, and yelling doesn't override deeds and documents. In the end, all she had were complaints and accusations while I had the title, the land, and the power to decide who passed through and who didn't. So if you ever find yourself buying land, remember this. Always know your rights. Always keep your paperwork ready. And never, ever let someone scare you off your own property. Because sometimes the best way to shut down a Karen is to buy the road beneath her feet and lock the gate behind her. Asterisk.